The phone felt cold against my ear on that Tuesday evening in March. My son's voice, once a source of comfort, now carried that patronizing tone he'd developed since dating Rebecca. "Mom, you have to understand." Michael said his words precise and measured. "This is Rebecca's dream wedding. Everything has to be perfect." "Of course, honey." I shifted in my kitchen chair, the wood creaking beneath me. "I've already picked out a nice dress. Nothing flashy, just something appropriate for the mother of the groom." "That's just it, Mom." He cut me off, his voice tightening with what I imagined was a wince on the other end of the line. "Rebecca and I have been talking, and we think you might not fit the aesthetic." The aesthetic. The word hung between us, foreign and sharp, as if Michael's wedding was a magazine spread, and I was a piece of furniture that clashed with the decor. "What do you mean, Michael?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his words landed like physical blows. You're not photogenic anymore, Mom. You've aged a lot these past few years, and Rebecca's family is very image conscious. Her father is paying for everything, and they want the photos to be perfect. You understand, right?" I understood that the woman who had given birth to him, who had sacrificed everything for him, who had worked herself into exhaustion to give him every opportunity, was now too ugly to witness his happiness. "Michael," my voice came out smaller than I intended. "I'm your mother. I know, and I love you for everything you've done. But this is about starting my new life with Rebecca." His words were rehearsed as if Rebecca had helped him practice. Perhaps they'd sat together on their designer sofa, going over the best way to tell his aging mother she wasn't welcome at their perfect day. "She thinks we both think it might be time to consider some long-term care options for you anyway." The room tilted slightly. Long-term care options. There are some really nice facilities where you could have companions your own age activities, proper medical care. A nursing home. At 68, with nothing wrong with me but gray hair, laugh lines, and hands that showed the honest work they'd done, my son wanted to put me in a home so I wouldn't embarrass his bride. "Mom, don't be dramatic. It's not like that." But it was exactly like that. Rebecca had come into our lives 2 years ago, like a perfectly manicured tornado, and I'd watched my son transform into someone I didn't recognize. Gone was the boy who used to call me every Sunday, who brought me flowers on Mother's Day, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. In his place stood this stranger who spoke about aesthetics and image as if they were more important than the woman who'd given him life. I thought about all the sacrifices, the college fund I'd drained to pay for his MBA, the down payment I'd helped him with for his first house, the countless times I'd babysat for neighbors' kids for extra money, just so he could have name-brand sneakers like the other children. I remembered the way I'd smiled through my own loneliness, never dating, never remarrying, because I didn't want to complicate his life with a stepfather. "Rebecca's right, you know." He continued, warming to his theme now that I hadn't hung up. "You've been isolated since you retired. It's not healthy. At Sunset Manor, you'd have social activities, proper meals, medical supervision. We've already looked into it. They have an opening next month." Next month. They'd already looked into it. "And what if I say no?" The question emerged with unexpected strength. Another silence. Then, "Mom, you can't live independently forever. Rebecca and I are starting a family soon, and we won't have time to keep checking on you. This is what's best for everyone." What's best for everyone, as if I were a problem to be solved, rather than a person who devoted 34 years of her life to making sure he became the man he was today. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night I sat in the kitchen of the small house I'd scrimped and saved to buy after Michael left for college. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, barely big enough for a table, but it was mine. I'd painted every wall myself, refinished the hardwood floors on my hands and knees, planted the garden that now bloomed with roses and tomatoes each summer. I looked at the refrigerator covered with photos of Michael through the years, his first day of school, gap-toothed and grinning, his high school graduation, college graduation, the day he got his first promotion. In every photo, I was there beside him, beaming with pride. How had I become too ugly for his happiness? I pulled out a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and poured myself a glass, then another. As the wine warmed my empty stomach, I felt something shift inside me. Not just hurt, I'd expected that, but something harder, something that tasted like 34 years of unreciprocated devotion, curdling into something entirely different. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the bottom drawer of my old dresser. Buried beneath sweaters I'd knitted but never wore were manila folders I hadn't touched in months. bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios. Michael thought he knew his mother. He thought I was just a lonely old woman whose greatest accomplishment was raising him. He had no idea what I'd been quietly building all these years, preparing for the day when I'd no longer be able to work, when I'd need security in my old age. He had no idea that the mother he considered too ugly for his perfect wedding was worth more than he could imagine. And as I sat there surrounded by documents that told the real story of my life, the story of a woman who'd planned, saved, and invested with the same determination she'd once used to build a life for her ungrateful son, I began to smile. If Michael wanted to start fresh with his new life, if he wanted to erase me from his perfect picture, then perhaps it was time he learned exactly what he was giving up. Perhaps it was time for his mother to start fresh too. The morning after Michael's call, I spread everything out on my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle that had taken me decades to assemble: bank statements, property deeds, stock certificates, insurance policies, the paper trail of a life lived more carefully than anyone, including my son, had ever realized. Most people saw what Michael saw: a tired woman in discount store clothes, clipping coupons, driving a 10-year-old Honda, living in a modest house in an unfashionable neighborhood. What they didn't see was the method behind what looked like mere frugality. The first property deed was for a small duplex I'd bought 15 years ago, just after Michael started college. The seller was desperate; a divorce needed cash fast, and I'd swooped in with an offer that was fair but immediate. I'd used the money from selling my late mother's engagement ring and the small inheritance she'd left me. Money I'd never told Michael about because I knew he'd have ideas for how to spend it. The duplex was in a neighborhood everyone said was transitional, which is real estate code for poor now, but probably not forever. I'd rented out both units to cover the mortgage and maintenance, living off my cleaning wages, while the property slowly, steadily appreciated. Then there was the second property, a small commercial building I'd bought 8 years later. The previous owner was an elderly man whose children lived out of state and wanted nothing to do with managing rental property. I'd approached him directly, cash offer again below market value, but with a quick closing. 3 small businesses rented space there: a tax preparation service, a nail salon, and a sandwich shop. Nothing glamorous, but all reliable. All paying rent that went straight into my savings after covering the mortgage. The third property had been my boldest move: a 4-unit apartment building in what used to be called the wrong side of town, until the young professionals discovered they could afford twice the space there for half the price. I bought it 3 years ago, just before the neighborhood really started turning around. The mortgage was higher, but so was the rental income. The building was now worth nearly double what I'd paid. All told, my real estate portfolio was worth just over $1.2 million. But that wasn't all. I'd been investing in index funds for 20 years, putting away every spare dollar after my frugal living expenses were covered. Nothing fancy, nothing risky, just steady, boring investments that grew year after year while I continued to live like a woman with nothing. The portfolio was worth another $800,000. Then there were the life insurance policies. 3 of them, actually. The first was a modest policy I'd bought when Michael was young, just enough to ensure he'd have something if anything happened to me. But as the years passed and my other investments grew, I'd bought 2 larger policies using part of my real estate income to pay the premiums. Total death benefit, $500,000. My checking account, the one Michael probably assumed held my meager Social Security and pension, actually contained $127,000. My savings account held another $200,000. Altogether, I was worth just over $2. $6 million. I'd built this fortune not out of greed, but out of fear. Fear of being dependent. Fear of being a burden. Fear of ending up in some state-run facility if I couldn't care for myself. Ironically, the very independence I'd worked so hard to secure was exactly what my son now wanted to take away from me. The money had been my secret, my security blanket, my insurance against an uncertain future. I'd planned to tell Michael about it eventually, maybe when I turned 70, maybe when I actually did need help. I'd imagined his surprise, his pride that his mother had been more capable than he'd realized. I'd imagined him understanding that all those years of secondhand clothes and generic groceries hadn't been about deprivation. They'd been about building something lasting. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with 20 years of careful planning spread before me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades' power. Michael wanted me out of his life because I was an embarrassment. Rebecca wanted me in a nursing home because I was an inconvenience. Neither of them had any idea that the shabby old woman they were trying to discard had more money than they'd likely ever see. I picked up the will I'd drafted 5 years earlier. It was simple, straightforward. I leave my entire estate to my beloved son Michael Patterson, knowing he will use it wisely to build the life I always dreamed he would have. How naive that seemed now. How foolishly sentimental. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. Franklin and Associates, how may I help you? This is Dorothy Patterson. I need to schedule an appointment with Mr. Franklin to revise my will. Let me check his calendar. Would Thursday at 2:00 work? Thursday. That gave me 2 days to decide exactly how to rewrite my life's work, how to redirect the fortune I'd spent 20 years building away from the son who decided I was too ugly to love. After I hung up, I called my oldest friend, Helen Morrison. Helen and I had worked together at Morrison Office Services for 15 years before I started my own small cleaning business. She was the only person who knew about my investments, the only one who'd been there the day I signed the papers on my first property purchase. Dorothy, is everything okay? You sound strange. I told her about Michael's call about the wedding, about the nursing home. Helen had met Michael dozens of times over the years, had watched me sacrifice for him, had bitten her tongue when I chose his needs over my own again and again. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Honey, she finally said, I've been waiting for this phone call for years. What do you mean? I mean, I've been waiting for you to see what the rest of us have seen for a long time. That boy has been taking advantage of your love since he was old enough to manipulate. The truth of her words stung. Remember when he was 16 and needed money for that school trip? I remembered. I'd worked double shifts for 2 months to pay for it. And when he was 25 and needed help with his car payment, I'd given him money I'd been saving for a small vacation, the first real trip I'd planned in years. And when he was 30 and needed... I know, Helen. I know. Do you? Because you've been blind to it for so long, I wasn't sure you'd ever see clearly. He's never seen you as a person, Dorothy. Just as a resource, a source of money, emotional support, unconditional love that he never had to earn or reciprocate. She was right, and I'd known it somewhere deep inside, but I'd buried that knowledge under layers of maternal devotion and hoped that someday he'd grow into the man I'd raised him to be. What are you going to do? Helen asked. I looked at the will again, at those naive words about my beloved son. I'm going to change my will, I said. I'm going to give my money to people who actually need it. Good for you. And then what? I thought about that for a moment. What came after rewriting the will? What came after 20 years of planning for a future that would no longer exist the way I'd imagined? I don't know yet, I admitted. But for the first time in 34 years, I'm going to find out what it's like to make decisions based on what I want instead of what Michael needs. The freedom in that statement was both exhilarating and terrifying. I'd been a mother for so long I wasn't sure I remembered how to be anything else. But as I looked at the documents spread across my table, proof of the woman I'd been quietly becoming while playing the role of devoted mother, I realized I was about to find out. James Franklin's office smelled like leather and old money, which seemed appropriate given what I was about to do. He was a small man in his 60s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades listening to people's most private affairs. I'd chosen him 5 years ago when I first had my will drafted because he came recommended as discreet and thorough, but I never imagined I'd be back to unravel everything I'd previously put in place. Mrs. Patterson, he said, settling behind his mahogany desk. When you called to schedule this appointment, you mentioned wanting to make substantial changes to your will. Before we begin, I want to make sure this is something you've thought through carefully. Estate planning decisions made in emotional states often lead to regret. I'd expected this. James Franklin hadn't built his reputation by letting clients make rash decisions they'd later want to reverse. Mr. Franklin, I'm 68 years old. I've had 4 days to think about this, but honestly, I've been thinking about it for much longer than that. My circumstances have changed, and my will needs to reflect reality, not wishful thinking. He opened my file and reviewed the existing will, the one that left everything to Michael. This is a substantial estate. When we drafted this, you mentioned you'd built it with your son's future in mind. That was before I learned what my son actually thinks of me. I told him about the phone call about being too ugly for the wedding, about the nursing home. James Franklin was a professional who'd probably heard every family dysfunction imaginable. But I saw something flicker across his face, disgust maybe, or recognition of a story he'd heard too many times. I see, he said quietly. And you want to remove your son as beneficiary entirely? Completely. I want to redirect my entire estate to the Women's Educational Foundation. The Women's Educational Foundation was an organization I'd been quietly supporting for years with small donations. They provided scholarships and job training for women trying to escape abusive relationships or rebuild their lives after divorce or widowhood. Women like I might have been if I'd been brave enough to prioritize my own needs earlier. That's a significant charitable bequest. The foundation will be quite surprised, I imagine. I hope they'll put it to good use. There are a lot of women out there who need a second chance, who need to know they can build something for themselves, even when everyone around them says they're not worth investing in. James Franklin made notes on a legal pad. And you're certain about this. Once we execute new documents, your previous will become invalid. If something were to happen to you, your son would inherit nothing. Nothing is exactly what he's earned. We spent the next 2 hours going through every detail. I wanted the will to be ironclad with no possibility for Michael to contest it successfully. James Franklin suggested additional documentation, a video recording of me explaining my reasoning letters to be opened after my death that would make my intentions clear. He wanted to be absolutely certain that when the time came, there would be no doubt about my mental capacity or decision-making ability. There is one more thing, I said as we were finishing up. I want to include a letter to my son, something to be delivered with the will. What kind of letter? I'd been thinking about this since the night he called. I want him to understand what he's lost, not just the money. I want him to know who I really was, what I accomplished, what I sacrificed. I want him to know that the woman he considered too ugly to acknowledge was worth more than he ever imagined. James Franklin nodded. We can arrange for that. I'll have my secretary prepare the documents for your signature next week, and we can record your video statement at that time. As I was gathering my purse to leave, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mrs. Patterson, if you don't mind my asking, and feel free not to answer, what are your plans now? You're making this change to your will, but you're still a relatively young woman with many years ahead of you. It was a good question, one I'd been asking myself. What did you do with the rest of your life when you'd spent so many years living it for someone else? I'm not sure, I said honestly. For the first time in my adult life, I get to find out. The following week, I returned to sign the new will and record my video statement. Sitting in front of James Franklin's camera, looking directly into the lens, I spoke clearly about my decision. My name is Dorothy Mae Patterson, and I am of sound mind and body as I make these statements. I am changing my will not out of temporary anger, but out of clarity about the relationship between myself and my son, Michael Patterson. For 34 years, I believed that unconditional love meant accepting whatever treatment I received in return. I believed that being a good mother meant sacrificing my own needs, my own dignity, my own worth for my child's benefit. I was wrong. Love should be reciprocal. Respect should be earned and given in return. The man I raised has made it clear that he sees no value in me beyond what I can provide him, and that he considers my very existence an embarrassment to his new life. Therefore, I am leaving my estate to an organization that helps women build better lives for themselves. Women like the woman I should have been brave enough to be years ago. Women like the woman I'm finally becoming now. Michael, if you're watching this, know that you had a choice. We all did. You chose to see me as disposable. I'm choosing to dispose of the life I built around that illusion. After the recording, I felt both empty and full, at the same time empty of the old dreams full of possibility I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. Helen was waiting for me at the coffee shop down the street from the lawyer's office. She had offered to come with me for moral support, but I'd wanted to handle it alone. Now I was glad to see her familiar face. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said, and was surprised to realize it was true. "Scared, but free." "Good. You should be scared. You're about to find out who Dorothy Patterson is when she's not busy being Michael Patterson's mother." "What if I don't like who that is?" Helen smiled. "Honey, you've been hiding her under a bushel for 34 years. I have a feeling she's going to surprise you." As we sat there drinking coffee, I found myself thinking about practical things. I didn't want to stay in the same town, in the same house where I'd spent so many years waiting for Michael to visit or call. I didn't want to keep living the small life I'd built around his needs. "Helen," I said suddenly, "how do you feel about traveling?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we took a trip, a real trip, not just a weekend somewhere? What if we went to Europe or Australia or somewhere we've always talked about but never gone?" Helen's eyes lit up. "Dorothy Patterson, are you suggesting we become jet-setting ladies of leisure?" Why not? I've got more money than I knew what to do with when I was planning to leave it to Michael. If I'm going to spend it on something worthwhile, why shouldn't that something be living the life I never let myself have? For the first time since Michael's phone call, I felt something that wasn't anger or hurt or determination. I felt excitement. The future, which had looked so bleak and limited just a week ago, suddenly seemed wide open. But first, there was one more thing I needed to do. One last gift I wanted to give my son. I wanted him to have one perfect day, his wedding day, before he learned what his cruelty had cost him. I wanted to sit in that church in the back row where his bride's aesthetic wouldn't be disturbed and watch him smile his biggest smile. I wanted to see him believe that he'd successfully discarded the inconvenient parts of his old life. And then I wanted to hand him an envelope that would teach him the difference between what you think you're throwing away and what you've actually lost. The wedding was still 3 weeks away. That gave me time to plan my final performance as Michael Patterson's mother. I woke up on Michael's wedding day feeling calmer than I had in months. For 3 weeks I'd been planning this moment, and now it was finally here. The morning sun streamed through my bedroom window, illuminating the dress I'd chosen for the occasion. A simple navy blue sheath dress with a matching jacket. Elegant but not attention-grabbing. The kind of outfit that would photograph well from a distance, but wouldn't upstage the bride. I'd had my hair done the day before at a salon I'd never used, spending more on a cut and style than I usually spent in 6 months. The stylist, a young woman named Carmen with genuine warmth in her eyes, had worked magic with my gray hair, giving it shape and shine I hadn't seen in years. "You look beautiful," she'd said when she finished. "Whatever this is for, you're going to be stunning." If only she knew. I'd also gone shopping for the first time in years. Really shopping, not just picking up necessities at discount stores. I'd bought new shoes, a new purse, even new underwear, because somehow starting over seemed to require being new from the inside out. The woman in my mirror looked like someone who belonged at a society wedding, someone with dignity and presence. Too bad Michael would never get the chance to introduce me. At 9 o'clock, I called a taxi. I'd briefly considered driving myself, but I wanted today to be different from every other day I'd spent as Michael's mother. Today I was a guest, not just an obligation. The church was beautiful, one of those historic downtown churches with soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the stone floors. Rebecca's family had clearly spared no expense. White roses and baby's breath adorned every pew, and yards of white silk ribbon created an aisle that looked like a pathway to heaven. I took a seat in the very back row, just as Michael had undoubtedly hoped I would if I came at all. From here I could see everything without being seen. The ushers in their matching tuxedos, the guests in their carefully chosen outfits, the photographer who moved around like a dancer, capturing every angle of Rebecca's perfect day. Helen had wanted to come with me, but I'd told her this was something I needed to do alone. She'd hugged me extra tight that morning when she dropped off the envelope that now sat in my purse like a small bomb waiting to detonate. As the church filled with guests, I recognized some faces from Michael's past. His college roommate, now a successful lawyer. His first boss, who'd always sent me Christmas cards. Some neighbors from the house where he'd grown up. These were people who'd known me when I was still visible in Michael's life, before Rebecca had helped him understand that his past was something to be managed rather than celebrated. A few of them saw me and waved confused expressions crossing their faces. They probably wondered why I was sitting alone in the back, instead of in the front row where the mother of the groom belonged. I smiled and waved back, giving no indication that anything was amiss. Rebecca's family took up the first 3 rows on the bride's side. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all dressed like they'd stepped out of a wedding magazine. Her father, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a perfect tan, kept checking his watch with the nervous energy of someone who'd invested heavily in making sure everything went according to plan. On Michael's side, the first row sat empty except for his best man's parents. The mother of the groom's row, traditionally the place of honor, remained vacant, like a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. At exactly 11 o'clock, the music began. The bridal march filled the church with its familiar promise of new beginnings and happy endings. The congregation rose and I rose with them, watching as Rebecca appeared at the back of the church like a vision in white silk and French lace. She was beautiful, I had to admit. 28 years old with long blonde hair and the kind of naturally perfect features that looked good from every angle. Her dress probably cost more than I used to make in 6 months, and she moved down the aisle with the confidence of someone who never doubted she deserved the very best life had to offer. But it was Michael I couldn't stop watching. He stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair styled with just the right amount of product, his face glowing with joy and anticipation. This was what happiness looked like on my son, pure, uncomplicated, unaware of any shadow or complexity. He looked like a man who'd successfully arranged his life exactly as he wanted it, who'd removed all obstacles to his perfect future. As Rebecca reached the altar and took his arm, Michael's smile was so bright it could have powered the church. This was the smile I'd lived for during all those years of sacrifice. The smile that had made every double shift and second-hand purchase worth it. Seeing it now, knowing what I knew, felt like watching a beautiful sunset before a hurricane. The ceremony was everything a high society wedding should be: elegant, traditional, flawlessly executed. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together, about the importance of family, and the bonds that endure beyond all challenges. Michael and Rebecca exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to love and honor each other, to put each other first, to build a future based on trust and mutual respect. I wondered if Michael heard the irony in his own words. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, when Michael kissed his bride, and the congregation erupted in applause, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. Pride. He looked so handsome, so happy. Loss. This should have been a moment we shared, a culmination of all the years I'd invested in his future. And something else. Something that felt like completion. This was the last time I would ever see my son smile with uncomplicated joy. In about an hour, everything would change for him, and it would be my doing. Part of me, the part that had spent 34 years protecting him from every disappointment, wanted to tear up the envelope in my purse and let him keep his illusions. But the stronger part, the part that had finally learned the difference between love and self-destruction, knew this was necessary for him, and especially for me. The recessional began, and Michael and Rebecca walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. As they passed my row, Michael's eyes swept the congregation, accepting congratulations and well wishes from their guests. For just a moment, his gaze landed on me. I saw the shock register on his face, surprised that I'd actually come confusion about why I was sitting in the back. A flicker of what might have been embarrassment, as he realized some of his guests had probably wondered why his mother wasn't in the family section. But his new wife was pulling him forward, and the photographer was calling for pictures, and the moment passed. Michael's attention returned to his perfect day, and I became invisible again, exactly as he'd wanted. The receiving line formed in the narthex, and I waited until most of the guests had offered their congratulations before approaching. Rebecca was radiant in her white dress, accepting compliments and admiration, like someone accustomed to being the center of attention. Michael stood beside her, one hand on her waist, playing the role of devoted husband with natural ease. When they saw me approaching, I watched a quick conversation pass between them in glances. Rebecca's smile became slightly more fixed, and Michael straightened his shoulders like someone preparing for an unpleasant but manageable task. "Mom," he managed when I reached them. "You came?" "Of course I came. You're my son." Rebecca extended her hand with the gracious smile of someone who'd been taught good manners from birth. "Mrs. Patterson, thank you so much for being here. You look lovely." She was lying, of course, but she was lying beautifully, the way people do when good breeding demands politeness, regardless of personal feelings. "Thank you, Rebecca. You make a beautiful bride. Michael is very lucky." "We both are," Michael interjected, and I heard the message beneath his words. Lucky to have each other. Lucky to be starting fresh. Lucky to be free of complications from the past. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small wrapped gift, a silver picture frame I'd bought specifically for this moment. "Just a little something for your new home." "Thank you." Rebecca accepted the gift with another perfect smile. "That's so thoughtful." What they didn't see was me palming the envelope from my purse as I handed over the gift. What they didn't notice was me slipping it into Michael's tuxedo jacket when I leaned in to give him a congratulatory hug. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered in his ear, and meant it. I was proud of the man he'd become, even if that man no longer had room in his life for the woman who'd made him possible. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered back. And for just a moment, he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Then Rebecca was pulling him away to greet more guests, and I was forgotten again, just another well-wisher in a long line of people celebrating their perfect beginning. I made my way toward the exit, stopping to chat briefly with old acquaintances, accepting compliments on how well I looked, deflecting questions about why I wasn't sitting with family. To everyone else, I probably seemed like a proud mother who'd raised a successful son and was now graciously stepping back to let him build his new life. If only they knew. As I waited for my taxi outside the church, I thought about the envelope now burning in Michael's jacket pocket. Inside was a letter I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, and a business card for James Franklin with a note to call him first thing Monday morning. By Tuesday, my son would know exactly what his cruelty had cost him. By Tuesday, the mother he'd considered too ugly to acknowledge would be officially dead to him. By Tuesday, I would be free. I didn't have to wait until Tuesday. Helen called me at 8:30 Sunday morning, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement. "Dorothy, turn on your phone. Turn on everything. Check your email, your voicemail, all of it." I'd spent Saturday evening and Sunday morning in deliberate isolation, phones turned off, curtains drawn, existing in the peaceful bubble of a decision made and consequences set in motion. I'd known that once Michael found the envelope, and he would find it probably while changing out of his tuxedo at the hotel, my quiet life would explode into chaos. I'd wanted one last night of peace before the storm. Now the storm had arrived. My voicemail was full. 17 messages, all from Michael, starting calm and escalating into something approaching hysteria. I listened to them in chronological order, watching my son's perfect wedding day disintegrate in real time. Message 1, Saturday evening, 7:15 p.m. "Mom, I found your envelope. Very funny. Call me back so we can talk about this like adults." He thought it was a joke, a manipulation maybe designed to get his attention. He had no idea. Message 3, Saturday, 8:45 p.m. "Mom, I called James Franklin's emergency line. He won't tell me anything until Monday, but he confirmed you're his client. What the hell is going on?" He was starting to understand this wasn't a game. Message 7, Saturday, 11:30 p.m. $6 million. "Are you insane? Where did this money come from? How long have you been lying to me about everything?" The disbelief in his voice was almost funny. My son, who thought he knew everything about his poor, pathetic mother, discovering she'd been living a completely different life than the one he'd imagined. Message 12, Sunday, 10:15 a.m. "Rebecca's father knows about this. Someone saw your letter, and now her whole family knows you were at the wedding to what humiliate us." Rebecca's locked herself in the bathroom. She won't even look at me. "What have you done?" So word had spread. Somehow the contents of my letter had become public knowledge at the reception. I wondered if Michael had been careless or if someone had seen him reading it and demanded to know what was wrong. Either way, my final gift to him had been even more public than I'd planned. Message 17, Sunday, 7:45 a.m. "I'm coming over. We're going to fix this. Whatever's wrong with you, whatever I did, we can work it out. You can't just destroy my life because you're angry about the wedding. This is insane. Mom, you're acting insane." I wasn't acting insane. For the first time in decades, I was acting sane. Helen arrived before Michael did, carrying coffee and pastries, and the fierce loyalty of a friendship that had weathered decades. She found me sitting calmly at my kitchen table, still in my robe, looking remarkably peaceful for someone who'd just detonated her son's life. "Tell me everything," she demanded, settling into the chair across from me. I told her about the letter, how I'd written it to explain not just what he was losing, but who he was losing. How I'd detailed every sacrifice, every property purchase, every investment decision made with his future in mind. How I'd explained that the shabby old woman he was embarrassed to claim had built a fortune that would have secured his children's children's futures. "And now it's all going to help other women instead," Helen said with satisfaction. "Every penny." "What about Rebecca?" I almost laughed. According to Michael's messages, Rebecca's father is reassessing the marriage. Apparently marrying a man whose mother publicly humiliated him at his own wedding isn't the social coup they thought they were making, especially when that mother turns out to have more money than they do. The doorbell rang at 9:15. Through the peephole, I could see Michael pacing on my front porch, still wearing his tuxedo pants and dress shirt from the night before, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. He looked like a man who'd spent his wedding night in hell. Good. I opened the door and stepped aside to let him in. He brushed past me into the living room, spinning around to face me with the wild energy of someone running on adrenaline and desperation. "Mom, what have you done?" "Hello, Michael. How was your wedding night?" He stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. My wedding night was spent explaining to my wife's family why my mother ambushed us with some insane story about secret millions and revenge schemes. Rebecca won't even talk to me. Her father is talking about annulment. My life is destroyed. I'm sorry to hear that. You're sorry. You're sorry you orchestrated this. You planned this whole thing. I walked to my chair, the same chair where I'd sat listening to him tell me I was too ugly for his happiness, and settled myself calmly. Would you like some coffee? Coffee. Are you completely insane? I want to know where you got $2.6 million, and I want to know why you're giving it away to strangers instead of your own son. Helen, who'd been watching this exchange from the kitchen doorway, stepped forward. Maybe because your son told her she was too ugly to come to his wedding. Michael's head whipped toward her. This is between me and my mother. No, Helen countered quietly. This is between a woman and the child who threw her away the moment she became inconvenient. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I've watched Dorothy sacrifice everything for you for 34 years. I watched her work double shifts to pay for your college. I watched her give you down payment money for your house while she kept driving that old car. I watched her turn down every social invitation, every chance for her own happiness, because she was always available in case you needed something. Michael looked between us, and I could see him realizing that this wasn't just about the wedding, wasn't just about Rebecca's aesthetic preferences. This was about a pattern he'd never bothered to examine. Mom, he said, his voice softer now, pleading. I know I handled the wedding wrong. I was trying to keep peace with Rebecca's family, trying to make sure everything went smoothly. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me, Michael. And more importantly, you showed me exactly how you see me. Not as a person deserving respect and love, but as a problem to be managed. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When's the last time you asked about my life, my interests, my dreams? When's the last time you treated me like someone whose feelings mattered? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. The nursing home, Michael. You and Rebecca had already looked into putting me in a nursing home because I was inconvenient, because an elderly woman with my own life and opinions didn't fit into your perfect picture. We thought it would be better for you. You thought it would be better for you. You thought it would be easier to park me somewhere out of sight so you wouldn't have to think about me anymore. Michael sank into my couch, his head in his hands. What do you want me to do? How do I fix this? It was the question I'd been waiting for, and the answer came easier than I'd expected. You can't fix this, Michael. Some things once broken can't be put back together. But I love you. You're my mother. Love isn't just a feeling, sweetheart. It's how you treat people. It's how you prioritize them in your life. It's whether you make space for them, even when it's inconvenient. I moved toward the window, looking out at the garden I'd planted, the life I'd built. You don't love me, Michael. You love the idea of me, the devoted mother who exists to serve your needs and asks for nothing in return. That's not fair. Fair? I turned back to face him. Was it fair that I worked 60-hour weeks so you could have name-brand clothes? Was it fair that I never dated, never remarried because I didn't want to complicate your life with a stepfather? Was it fair that I gave you every opportunity to build the life you wanted while I built nothing for myself? Helen cleared her throat. Dorothy, I think you should tell him about Tuesday. Michael looked up sharply. What about Tuesday? I'd been planning to let him find out from James Franklin, but looking at my son now, disheveled, desperate, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd lost, I realized I wanted to deliver this news myself. Tuesday, I'm meeting with a realtor about selling this house. Wednesday, I'm closing my bank accounts and transferring everything to my new accounts in Switzerland. Thursday, I'm flying to Europe with Helen for an indefinite stay. The color drained from Michael's face. You're leaving? I'm starting over. At 68, I'm finally going to find out what it's like to live for myself instead of for someone who doesn't appreciate the sacrifice. But what if you get sick? What if you need help? I'll hire help. I can afford it now that I'm not supporting an ungrateful child. Michael stood up abruptly, pacing again. This is insane. You can't just disappear. You can't just abandon your family. The irony was so thick I almost choked on it. Michael, you already abandoned me. You just expected me to sit quietly in whatever corner you assigned me until you decided you needed something. But the money is going to women who actually need it. Women who are trying to rebuild their lives after men like you decided they were disposable. Men like me, I'm not some monster. I made one mistake. No, Michael, you made 1,000 small mistakes every day for years. The wedding was just the day you finally said out loud what your actions had been telling me all along." He looked around my small house as if seeing it for the first time, really seeing it. The modest furniture, the carefully maintained everything, the life lived small so his could be large. "I had no idea about the money. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I was saving it for my old age, for the day I couldn't take care of myself. I was trying to make sure I'd never be a burden on you." I smiled sadly. Turns out I was already a burden, just not a financial one. Michael was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Can't we start over? Can't we try again?" For just a moment, looking at him sitting there in his wrinkled wedding clothes, I saw the little boy who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories, the teenager who brought me dandelions and called them flowers, the young man who used to tell people his mom was his hero. "I'm 68 years old, Michael. I don't have time to wait for you to grow into the man I tried to raise you to be." The finality in my voice must have reached him because he started crying, then deep wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Please don't do this. Please don't leave me." But it was too late for sorry. Sorry was what you said before you destroyed someone's life, not after. Helen appeared at my elbow. "Dorothy, we should go. The realtor is coming at 11. I nodded, grateful for the escape. I couldn't watch Michael cry without feeling the old instinct to comfort him, to fix his pain, even when he'd caused mine. As we headed for the door, Michael called out one last time, "Mom, please. I'll do anything. I'll make this right." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "Michael, I spent 34 years trying to make you into someone who wouldn't need to make this right. That was my choice. Now I'm making a different one." We left him sitting in my living room, surrounded by the modest life I'd built while secretly creating something magnificent. By the time I returned that evening, he was gone. He left 17 more messages over the next few days, then 10, then 5, then 1 just before my flight to Europe. "Mom, I know you'll probably never forgive me. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that I finally understand what I lost. Not just the money. You. I lost you. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life wishing I could take back that phone call." I listened to it sitting in the first-class lounge at the airport, Helen beside me with our boarding passes to Switzerland. It was a good apology, heartfelt, specific, free of excuses. It was also about 20 years too late. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. Dorothy Patterson was about to disappear forever, and with her the last traces of the woman who'd loved Michael more than she'd loved herself. The funeral was beautiful. Helen told me later Michael had spared no expense. White roses, a mahogany casket, a minister who spoke movingly about a devoted mother who'd lived her entire life for her son. The obituary in the local paper described Dorothy Patterson as a beloved mother and hard worker who passed peacefully after a brief illness. Of course, Dorothy Patterson wasn't dead. She was sitting on a terrace in Montreux, Switzerland, watching the sun set over Lake Geneva while sipping wine that cost more than her old monthly grocery budget. The cancer diagnosis had been real stage 2 breast cancer, caught early during a routine mammogram I'd scheduled right after changing my will. The prognosis was excellent with treatment, but it had given me the perfect cover story for my disappearance. As far as anyone in my old life knew, Dorothy Patterson had died quietly in a private medical facility in Switzerland, her body cremated according to her final wishes. Michael had tried to claim the body, of course. James Franklin had gently explained that there was no body to claim, that his mother had chosen private cremation and had left specific instructions that there be no service, no gathering, no fuss. Just a simple end to a life that had been in her final assessment too much about other people and not enough about herself. The truth was more complicated and more wonderful than death. After selling my house and settling my affairs, I'd liquidated everything I couldn't take with me and quietly transferred the money to Swiss accounts Helen and I had opened during a scouting trip the month before my supposed death. With my new passport legitimately obtained after legally changing my name to Dorothy Helen Morrison, taking Helen's maiden name, I'd created a new identity that had no connection to Michael Patterson's mother. The hardest part had been the chemotherapy. Even with the excellent Swiss medical care my money could buy, 6 months of treatment had been brutal. But Helen had been with me through every session, every side effect, every moment of doubt about the drastic step I'd taken. "Are you sure about this?" she'd asked during one particularly difficult week. "It's not too late to go back. You could tell Michael you survived, that you want to try again." I'd considered it. During the worst of the treatment, when I was weak and scared and questioning everything, part of me wanted nothing more than to call my son and hear him say he loved me. But then I'd remember the phone call, the wedding, the nursing home, the lifetime of taking me for granted. "I'm sure," I told her. Dorothy Patterson needed to die so I could finally live. And live I had. Once my treatment was complete and my health was restored, Helen and I had become those women we'd always talked about being, but never quite had the courage to become. We'd rented a beautiful apartment in Montreux with a view of the lake and the Alps. We traveled to Italy, France, Germany, Austria, all the places we'd dreamed about during those long years of working and saving and putting everyone else's needs first. I'd learned to paint. Helen had learned to speak French. We'd both learned that 68 wasn't too old to discover you were braver than you'd ever imagined. The money I'd transferred to the Women's Educational Foundation had made headlines in my old hometown. Local woman leaves fortune to charity. Read one newspaper article Helen had found online. The foundation's director had given interviews about the unexpected windfall and how they planned to use it to help hundreds of women get education and job training. Michael had been mentioned in those articles, too, described as the shocked survivor who had no idea about his mother's wealth. One piece quoted him saying his mother had been a private woman who never spoke about financial matters, and that he was proud she chose to help other women, even though her decision came as a complete surprise. At least he'd learned to lie gracefully about our relationship. That was something. Helen had shown me the articles during my recovery, and I'd felt a complex mix of emotions reading them. Pride that my money was already helping women rebuild their lives. Sadness that Michael was still performing the role of loving son, even after I was supposedly dead, and overwhelming relief that I was free of the need to care about his performance. Our Swiss apartment glowed with morning light as I finished packing for our trip to California. 1 year had passed since my death, a year of rebirth in so many ways. The cancer treatment, real breast cancer caught early, had been brutal but successful. My hair had grown back in a stylish silver crop that suited Dorothy Morrison far better than Dorothy Patterson's modest bun ever had. "Are you sure about this trip?" Helen asked, folding her favorite cashmere sweater into her suitcase. "Going back to America, I mean." "I'm not going back. I'm going forward just in that direction." I gestured vaguely toward the west. "Besides, I want to see those redwood forests before I die for real." Helen winced at my gallows humor. "Don't even joke about that. You're cancer-free now. And freer in every other way." I added my new sketchbook to my carry-on. I'd discovered painting during my recovery, not the paint-by-numbers kits they'd offered at the chemotherapy center, but real art. Landscapes mostly capturing the light on Lake Geneva, the snow-capped Alps, the gardens blooming below our balcony. I had no illusions about my talent, but the act of creation filled something in me that motherhood had left hollow. Our flight to San Francisco was long but comfortable in business class, another luxury I'd never allowed myself in my previous life. We arrived disoriented from jet lag, but excited to begin what Helen called our American adventure. Her daughter Megan met us at the airport with her wife Sarah and their 2 children, Emma and Liam. They greeted Helen with exuberant hugs, then turned to me with genuine warmth. "Welcome to California, Dorothy." Megan pulled me into an embrace. "Mom says you're practically family now." Family. The word landed differently than it once had. I hadn't thought of myself as anyone's family since walking away from Michael. Yet here was this woman I'd never met in person treating me like a beloved aunt. Her children, 9 and 11, bombarded me with questions about Switzerland and the real Matterhorn. "Did you know," Liam informed me solemnly, "that the Disneyland Matterhorn is exactly 1/100th the size of the real mountain? It's a centile." "He means percentile," Emma corrected with the weary superiority of an 11-year-old. I laughed a real laugh that started in my belly and rose up unfiltered. When had I last laughed like that? With Michael. Had I ever? Their home was a beautiful Victorian in one of San Francisco's historic neighborhoods, with views of the bay from the upper windows. That first evening, we ate dinner in their small backyard garden, sharing stories as the children peppered us with questions about Europe. I found myself offering opinions about books and politics, telling anecdotes from our travels, being fully present as a person, rather than performing the restricted role of mother. "You know what's strange?" I said to Helen later as we settled into the guest room. "I feel more like myself here than I ever did at home." "That's because you're not defined by your past here. No one's expecting you to be anything but who you are right now." The next day, Megan took us sightseeing around San Francisco. We rode cable cars, visited Fisherman's Wharf, and walked across the Golden Gate Bridge. I took photographs with the expensive camera I'd bought myself, not documenting someone else's milestones, but capturing moments I wanted to remember. In the afternoon, we visited an art gallery in Union Square, where a new exhibition of contemporary painters was opening. As we wandered among the canvases, I felt drawn to a particular piece, an abstract swirl of blues and greens that somehow captured the feeling of looking out over Lake Geneva at dawn. "You like that one?" A woman approached, elegant in her 70s, with silver hair twisted into an artistic knot. "It speaks to me," I admitted. "The colors remind me of my home in Switzerland." "I'm Olivia Reeves, the artist." She extended her hand, her eyes bright behind vibrant red glasses. "You have an excellent eye that's one of my favorites from the series." "Dorothy Morrison. I live in Montreux, and you've captured the light on the lake perfectly." We fell into conversation about art and light and the challenge of translating memory onto canvas. I mentioned my own modest attempts at painting since moving to Switzerland, and she offered thoughtful advice about technique and perspective. "If you're in town for a few days, I'm teaching a master class at the Community Arts Center on Thursday." Olivia handed me a card with the details. "It's usually full, but I could make space for you." "I'd like that very much." I tucked the card into my purse, surprised and pleased by the unexpected invitation. Later that week, we rented a car and drove north to the redwood forests. Walking among those ancient giants, some over 2,000 years old, provided a profound perspective. My entire life, with all its drama and pain and joy, was just a moment compared to these trees. They had stood here growing quietly while empires rose and fell, while wars were fought and borders redrawn, while countless humans lived and loved and died. I placed my hand on the rough bark of a tree that had been alive when Julius Caesar ruled Rome and felt my troubles shrink to their proper size. What did it matter if one mother and one son had lost their way? What did it matter if one woman had chosen freedom over obligation? Yet we lived in the moment, not the millennia. And in this moment, standing beneath the cathedral canopy of redwood branches, I felt profoundly alive. I had made the right choice for me, whatever pain it might have caused in the short term. "Grief isn't just for death, is it?" I said to Helen as we walked back to the car. "I think I've been grieving Michael for years, grieving the relationship we should have had, the son I thought he was. And now," she linked her arm through mine, steady as always, "now I think I'm ready to stop grieving and start growing. These trees taught me something: they reach for the light until the very end." That evening, I joined Olivia's art class. Under her guidance, I produced a landscape that captured not just the physical reality of the mountains I loved, but the emotional truth of what they meant to me: sanctuary, reinvention, freedom. "You have real talent," she told me afterward, studying my work with professional interest. "Have you considered showing your paintings?" I laughed. "I've only been painting for 6 months. Some of the best artists started late in life. Georgia O'Keeffe did her most famous work after she turned 60. Olivia adjusted her glasses. "It's never too late to become who you might have been." Her words resonated within me. Wasn't that exactly what I was doing? Becoming who I might have been if I hadn't surrendered my identity to motherhood so completely. We spent 3 weeks in California, dividing our time between San Francisco and excursions to Napa Valley, Monterey, and Yosemite National Park. I took hundreds of photographs and filled a sketchbook with impressions and ideas for future paintings. On our last night, Megan and Sarah hosted a dinner party for their close friends, including Olivia. "A toast," Sarah raised her glass, "to Helen and Dorothy for showing us that the best adventures often begin in the second act." "Or the third," I added with a smile. "To third acts." Olivia clinked her glass against mine. "Speaking of which, I've been thinking about your work, Dorothy. There's a small gallery in North Beach that features emerging artists, especially those with unique perspectives. Would you let me introduce you to the owner? He might be interested in including a few of your pieces in their spring exhibition." "But I'm going back to Switzerland next week." "Art travels," she shrugged. "And so do artists. Think about it, you could build connections in both places." The idea took root in my imagination, not just painting for myself, but sharing my work with others. Creating something that might outlast me, that would exist apart from my identity as someone's mother or friend. Something that was purely an expression of my own vision. On the long flight back to Switzerland, I sketched ideas for a series of paintings inspired by our American journey, the majesty of the redwoods, the sweep of the Pacific coastline. The geometric beauty of San Francisco's streets, all filtered through the perspective of a woman discovering her power late in life. Within 6 months, I had completed 12 paintings for the series. When Olivia emailed about an exhibition called Late Bloomers, featuring artists who had begun their careers after 50, I submitted photographs of my work immediately. To my surprise and delight, the gallery owner selected 4 pieces. "You'll need to come for the opening," Helen insisted when I shared the news. "It's your artistic debut." So we returned to San Francisco in April for the exhibition. Seeing my work professionally framed and displayed on a gallery wall was surreal, like catching a glimpse of another life I might have lived if I'd made different choices earlier. People actually stopped to study my paintings, tilting their heads to catch different angles, leaning in to examine brushstrokes, stepping back to appreciate the composition. A few even asked questions about my inspiration and technique. "They think I'm a real artist," I whispered to Helen during a quiet moment. "You are a real artist. The moment you committed to creating authentic work, you became one." By the end of the evening, 2 of my paintings had sold, one to a young couple furnishing their first home, and one to a corporate art consultant selecting pieces for a hotel lobby. The gallery owner handed me a check and invited me to contribute to their winter exhibition as well. On our last day in San Francisco, Helen suggested we visit the Golden Gate Park. We were sitting on a bench near the Japanese tea garden when a young family caught my attention, a father teaching his son how to fly a kite. The boy, about 7, was growing frustrated as the kite repeatedly nosedived into the grass. "Let me help." The father knelt beside him. "You're doing great, buddy. It just takes practice." Something about his patience, the gentle way he guided his son's hands without taking over, made my throat tighten. This was fatherhood as it should be: present, encouraging, kind. "Are you okay?" Helen touched my arm. "Just thinking about Michael," I admitted. "Wondering what kind of father he'll be if he and Rebecca ever have children." "You could find out, you know. You could contact him." I shook my head. "What would that accomplish? He thinks I'm dead. He's had to make peace with that." "But what if he hasn't? What if he's still grieving?" I watched the boy's kite finally catch the wind, his face lighting up with triumph. "Some grief is necessary. It shapes us, teaches us. Maybe Michael needed to lose me completely to understand what I meant to him." We flew home the next day, my mind turning over the question Helen had raised. Did I owe Michael the truth? Had my act of self-preservation been needlessly cruel? My answer came unexpectedly 2 weeks later when James Franklin forwarded an email from Michael. He had maintained minimal contact over the years, sending occasional updates about the Women's Educational Foundation and how my donation had been used. This message was different. It was a copy of a letter Michael had sent to the foundation. "To the Women's Educational Foundation, I am writing to express my deep gratitude for the work your organization does. 3 years ago, my mother, Dorothy Patterson, left her entire estate to your foundation. At the time, I was shocked and hurt by her decision. Today, I understand it was the final lesson from a woman who spent her life teaching me about love, sacrifice, and dignity, even when I failed to appreciate those lessons." After my mother's passing, I began volunteering with a local women's shelter initially as a way to process my grief and guilt. What started as an attempt to honor her memory has become my life's work. I now serve as the shelter's financial literacy coordinator, helping women who have experienced domestic violence rebuild their financial independence. Every day I see women who remind me of my mother, strong, determined, often underestimated. I teach them about saving, investing, and building security using the principles my mother quietly practiced throughout her life. I tell them about Dorothy Patterson, who built a small fortune while living modestly and putting everyone else first. I tell them that they too can create safety and independence for themselves, one careful decision at a time. I don't know if my mother would forgive me for how I treated her at the end. I certainly haven't forgiven myself. But I hope she would be proud of how her legacy continues, not just through your foundation's important work, but through the lessons I now share with others. With deepest respect, Michael Patterson. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words on my screen. My son, my Michael, had found his way to something meaningful after all, not because of my presence in his life, but because of my absence, because the void I left had forced him to confront the truth about himself. "Are you going to contact him?" Helen asked when I showed her the letter. I thought about it carefully, weighing the comfort it might bring him against the freedom we'd both found in our separate lives. "No," I said finally. Dorothy Patterson is dead. She had her chance at motherhood, and it ended as it had to. Dorothy Morrison has a different life now, a good life. You don't think he deserves to know you're alive? Perhaps he does, but I deserve the life I've built, the peace I've found. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people is to leave them with the version of us that serves them best. I wrote back to James Franklin thanking him for forwarding the letter and asking him to continue monitoring Michael's situation. I enclosed a check for the shelter where Michael volunteered with instructions that it be an anonymous donation. It was enough to know that my son had grown, that my final act of tough love had pushed him toward becoming the man I'd always hoped he would be. We had both found our way to meaningful lives separate, but connected by the invisible thread of our shared history. 2 years later, my artistic career had flourished beyond anything I could have imagined. My work hung in galleries across Europe and America. I'd been profiled in art magazines as the late-blooming sensation and Switzerland's unexpected expressionist. At 73, I had achieved a kind of recognition that had nothing to do with my role as anyone's mother, wife, or friend. One autumn evening, Helen and I attended the opening of my largest exhibition yet at a prestigious gallery in Geneva. The show was called Second Lives, featuring 30 paintings exploring themes of transformation and rebirth. As we moved through the crowded gallery, I overheard snippets of conversation about my work, serious discussions of technique, color theory, emotional resonance. It still amazed me that strangers found meaning in images that had come from my mind and hands. Dorothy, the gallery owner, approached with a young couple in tow. These collectors have come all the way from New York specifically to see your work. They're particularly interested in the centerpiece. The centerpiece was a large canvas titled Resurrection, a portrait of a woman with clear eyes and a serene smile, a woman who had journeyed through loss and sacrifice to find herself waiting patiently on the other side. The man extended his hand. Your work is extraordinary. The emotional depth, the honesty, it's rare to find contemporary art with such soul. Thank you. I smiled, struck by something familiar in his features. Are you artists yourselves? I work in finance, but my wife is a photographer, he explained. We've been collecting emerging artists for a few years now, ever since my mother's death. She left everything to charity, but her legacy taught me to value more than just material wealth. A chill ran through me. I studied his face more carefully, the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw. This is Michael, his wife introduced him. And I'm Rebecca. My son stood before me 5 years older, with flecks of gray at his temples and lines of experience around his eyes. He didn't recognize me, of course. The elegant artist with the stylish silver crop and designer glasses bore little resemblance to the tired mother in discount store clothes he'd once known. It's a pleasure to meet you both. I managed my voice steady, though my heart raced. What drew you to this particular painting? Michael gazed at the portrait. There's something in her expression, a kind of hard-won peace. It reminds me of my mother, actually. She built an entire life that none of us knew about until she was gone. She sounds remarkable. She was. I didn't appreciate her until it was too late. His voice held no self-pity, just quiet acceptance. But she taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, which was that love isn't just sentiment. It's how we treat people, how we prioritize them, how we make space for them even when it's inconvenient. He smiled ruefully. I spend my life trying to honor that lesson now. My own words reflected back to me from my son's lips. He had been listening after all, even if the understanding came too late for us. I hope she knows somehow, I said softly. I like to think she does. Michael touched his wife's hand. We named our daughter Dorothy. That night, after everyone had gone, I stood alone in the gallery, looking at my paintings, at the record of my journey from invisible mother to visible artist, from supporting character to protagonist, from living for others to living for myself. Michael had a daughter named Dorothy, a little girl who would grow up with a father who understood what it meant to truly see and value the women in his life, a father who had learned through loss how to love without entitlement or expectation. Perhaps someday, years from now, I would introduce myself to this child as a friend, an artist, a woman with stories to tell, not as the grandmother she never knew, but as someone new, someone who could offer her wisdom about creating her own life rather than living in service to others' expectations. But for now, it was enough to know that both Michael and I had found our way forward through the wreckage of our past relationship, We had each in our own way been resurrected. I thought of the redwoods again, how they grow stronger through fire, how their seeds sometimes need the heat of destruction to crack open and release new life. Michael and I had been forged in the fire of our mutual failures, his failure to see me, my failure to demand being seen. From those ashes, something better had emerged for both of us. I touched the canvas of resurrection one last time before leaving. The woman in the portrait smiled back at me with eyes that had seen both sorrow and joy, that understood the price of freedom and deemed it worth paying. Michael thought his mother was dead, and in a way he was right. The woman who had raised him, the woman who had made herself small so he could feel big, was gone forever. But the essential woman who had existed beneath both Dorothy Patterson and Dorothy Morrison remained. She had always been there waiting for the chance to emerge. And now at 73, she stood tall and straight in her hard-won selfhood, her artistic vision a gift she offered to the world on her own terms. I walked out of the gallery into the crisp Geneva evening, Helen waiting patiently in the car to take me home. Tomorrow I would begin a new painting. Tomorrow I would continue becoming who I might have been all along. My story wasn't ending. It was at long last truly beginning.